So The Little Mermaid is a thing. I mean, of course it's a thing. I didn't, forget about it. It's Disney, and they're hardcore about not letting people forget about the things they create. So of course The Little Mermaid is a thing. Although I have a weird love-hate relationship with Disney as a monolith of a company that is slowly subsuming all entertainment, I also freaking love The Little Mermaid. I remember watching this movie at my 7th birthday party with all of my friends over as we had cake. I don't remember if anyone else enjoyed it, but I did. I'm not sure if the movie was seminal in creating my love for music or even musicals, but it's still a fun watch, and of course the songs are awesome. I even own this movie on VHS. For all of you young kids out there, that's a thing we used to play movies on before we could just stream them. Like a DVD. Don't tell me you don't know what a DVD is! Now, The Little Mermaid is a fun tale, but it's not particularly deep. There are other animated movies I would pick over it, and there are definitely other musicals I would go to over it. There are even other animated musicals I would pick first. But there are a lot of good things going for it. Ariel has a fiery and passionate personality, and her design is awesome. Plus the fact that I'm a sucker for redheads, but she's not my favorite Disney princess. In fact, she's not even in my top 3. That would be Rapunzel, I did a whole episode about her, Belle, because she's a well-read baller, and Merida, because she has the best accent ever.
Jinx, Crivens help my bow.
Also, see the previous statement about redheads. But despite all of that, I do think that The Little Mermaid is actually more important as an animated movie and as a musical. Not because I think the animation is more important or the music is better, but because The Little Mermaid was a game changer in the movie industry, with its storytelling, character motivation, animation, the state of animated movies when it was made, and how every single dimension of the movie is masterfully linked back to the music. There's a reason that The Little Mermaid was the beginning of the Disney Renaissance, and why I have this complicated love-hate relationship with Disney and the properties they put out. And so today, I want to talk about The Little Mermaid. Meanwhile, no one at Disney is losing any sleep over me. I think most people know that The Little Mermaid, like most of Disney's animated musicals, is actually a reworking of an original story. In this case, it's based off the classic Hans Christian Andersen tale, also called The Little Mermaid. Walt Disney himself had the idea to create an animated version of this story as far back as the 1930s, after the success of Snow White, but production was constantly put off for various reasons. 50-odd years later, in the 1980s, the Disney animator Ron Clements stumbled upon the story and realized that it had an ideal foundation for the kind of animated storytelling that Disney pushed for in their animated productions. His pitch was originally turned down because it was thought to be too similar to the live-action movie Splash. Yeah, you probably want us to forget about that one now, don't you, Disney? But Clements was given the green light to start conceptualizing what a movie based off The Little Mermaid would look like. Clements wrote a 20-page concept that rearranged a lot of the original fairy tale and pitched it, but resources were being devoted to Oliver and Company as it was a more pressing release at the time. In 1988, Clements once again teamed up with his longtime collaborator John Musker as co-directors, and since Oliver and Company had been released, The Little Mermaid began production in earnest. Ariel herself was played by Jodie Benson, and she was supported by Pat Carroll and Samuel Wright as Ursula and Sebastian, respectively. The Little Mermaid was released in 1989, just before the holiday season, and was instantly a commercial and critical success, with praise for its expressive animation, characters, and music. It's gone on to be considered the first animated movie in a renewal of interest in production of animated movies at Disney. Although it could be argued that The Great Mouse Detective or Who Framed Roger Rabbit also contributed, it is the combination of several things in The Little Mermaid that frame it as the transition and place it as the definitive beginning of the Renaissance. Spoilers for The Little Mermaid in case you somehow haven't seen it or don't know the plot. No judgment. Okay, a little judgment. Ariel, the youngest daughter of Triton, the king of the ocean, is now 16. She feels unsatisfied with the world of the ocean and is fascinated by the world of the humans, who are blissfully unaware that merpeople dwell in the depths. Despite her father's warning, Ariel goes to the surface and spots a human prince named Eric and is enchanted by him and presumably his legs and what lies between them. When Triton finds out that Ariel has directly disobeyed him, he blasts some of Ariel's collection of human artifacts. Upset with her father and longing to be a part of the human world, Ariel makes a deal with the sea witch Ursula. She gives up her voice in exchange for legs, but if Eric does not kiss her in 3 days, she will give up her soul to Ursula. So Ariel and Eric meet, and all seems to be going well, and they look like they're falling in love, but Ursula shows up in disguise and enchants Eric to fall in love with her, so that she can own Ariel's soul, and then leverage that against Triton and control the ocean. With the help of her friends, Ariel manages to break the enchantment on Eric, and she can talk again, but it's too late. The sun has set, and now Ursula gets the power of the ocean and turns into a kaiju, conjures up a storm and a whirlpool, and all seems lost. So Eric rams a boat into her, and that solved that problem. And Triton sees how much Ariel loves Eric, and so he gives her legs, and everyone lives happily ever after. Until the sequel. Yeah, Disney, you thought I forgot about that one too. The plot of The Little Mermaid is not one of its stronger points, and there have been more than a few arguments leveled at Ariel as a character regarding her narrative trajectory being about going from father to husband, and again being defined largely by the fact that she is a goal for Eric, or that her goal is Eric. I don't disagree with those sentiments, but I do think that there's more to parse out than that. Ariel is the central character, but unlike the Disney princesses before her, most of the action and narrative trajectory come directly from the choices she makes rather than the circumstances that happen to her. See Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Cinderella. Unlike those ladies, Ariel straight up has a goal and does things in direct defiance of her male authority figure. But her goal is still bound to the narrative trajectory of a man. Yes and no. Ariel sings the song Part of Your World before she meets Eric. For the entirety of that song, the lyric is actually part of that world.
Wish I could be part of that world.
It's only until after meeting Eric does the line change to Part of Your World, but only for the reprise, which does have a more dramatic climax both musically, visually, and narratively.
Part of your world.
Ugh, that gets me every time. But it's still only a reprise, which means it's a smaller piece of work and it takes up less screen time than the original song. So although her goals are bound to Eric and his narrative, Ariel's goals are, at least in the beginning, more complicated. On top of this, when Ariel wants something, she goes out and gets it. Many people are often critical of Ariel for making an at best questionable deal with a literal sea witch! And I'm not about to defend that decision, but at least the decision and fallout of that terrible idea stem from Ariel's own actions, as opposed to just being enchanted to prick your finger and sleep so long you give Rip Van Winkle a run for his money, all because your famous parents slighted an evil fairy that one time. I'm not trying to say that Ariel is this dope feminist heroine, but I do think that for all the flack laid on her, she at least had a personality and is a more complex character than she is given credit for. Plus, there was a real tangible shift from the princesses of old. Audiences clearly identified with this newer princess for the new age, and we would see that legacy built on over the rest of the Renaissance and pushed further still in the 2010s. Aside from the return to and reinvention of the princess that had made Disney so famous once upon a time, The Little Mermaid's animation also marked a huge change in the way animated movies were made. The Little Mermaid was the last major Disney animated movie to be made using hand-drawn cell animation. This is when every frame of every scene had to be hand-drawn and then inked and colored separately. After this, Disney Studios began using computer programs to color the images rather than requiring cells. So it was the end of an era for animation of that style in Disney Studios. This movie also marked the beginning of a new era, as it was the first time that Disney used a prototype of the new coloring computer programs on some scenes, and the first time 3D animation was used in a Disney movie. You can actually see that a lot of the big ships are 3D. Very subtle, but so much easier than drawing every panel. I do not understand how animators were so patient. I can barely sit still long enough to edit a 10 to 20 minute video. So The Little Mermaid is the perfect send-off between the old animation practices mixed with the introduction of these new techniques. And it paved the way for gorgeous scenes like the fully 3D ballroom scene from Beauty and the Beast, and eventually the fully CGI animated movies of Tangled and Frozen. Animated movies are now considered wonderful pieces of art, and they can make complex and evocative narratives. But that wasn't always the case, and it's important to place The Little Mermaid in the historical context of the movie industry at the time in order to appreciate how significantly this movie shifted the cultural outlook on animated movies. At the time of its creation, animated movies were a lesser form of filmmaking. They were still considered a children's medium, and as such the film industry at large made the assumption that children were stupid and that stories for them should be simplistic, non-provocative, non-thought-provoking morality plays about fun talking animals and pretty princesses. I really hate it when people treat art for children as lesser, or that it needs to be simpler because children are simpler. But that was the belief at the time. No one cared about animated movies beyond the small amount of money they might make back, and even then the animation studio at Disney was past its prime. Some executives at Disney were dismissive, going so far as to say that the scoring for a film didn't matter because it was a film for children, or that because the film appealed to females, it would earn less. Boy, were they wrong. The film was a huge commercial success, and it outperformed its predecessor Oliver and Company easily. It won 3 Academy Awards and 2 Golden Globes, which are largely meaningless, but it means that those in the industry were taking note. Ariel is instantly recognizable, and although she didn't have audiences scrambling for paraphernalia like Elsa from Frozen, she is still a prominent part of the princess canon. and still played by Jodie Benson.
I have to assume you made a deal with an underwater sea witch where she took your voice in exchange for a pair of human legs?
No, good lord, who would do that?
The success of The Little Mermaid was so culturally significant that the Oscars actually had to create a category just for the next few Disney releases after The Little Mermaid because the movies continued to clean up at award shows. Without The Little Mermaid breaking into the industry in a bombastic and dramatic way, animated movies might have continued to be relegated to a lower children's art form, still winning awards but never drawing any real attention as a serious piece of art. It even got its own television show. Didn't forget about that one either. At the center of this game-changing piece of movie magic is the music. The music of The Little Mermaid has been so influential and so far-reaching that it has its own stage production on Broadway and has been studied in academic circles by musicians and film students alike. Because, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Alan Menken is the composer! Now, I'm a huge super fan of Alan Menken and basically everything that man touches musically, but this movie in particular is probably his most important work because it was Menken's first movie ever. Before this, he was only known for his work in stage productions. When Howard Ashman was brought on to help write a song for Oliver and Company, Musker and Clements asked for his input on The Little Mermaid. The directors were very pleased with what he had to say and decided that they would hire Ashman and Menken as a team to write lyrics, songs, and the score for the movie. Menken and Ashman had worked together before on a small off-Broadway musical called The Little Shop of Horrors, which has now gone on to be a cult classic musical and film. The musical duo appealed to the directors because they had seen them create lyrical and melodically impressive Broadway-style songs, but with only a minimal amount of instrumentation, a much cheaper option than a full orchestra, and perfect for a low-budget animated production. For Menken, this was a challenge, as he was used to writing songs, and of course he and Ashman had proved that they were a great writing team, but he had only ever written songs and accompaniment for stage productions, and was unclear on how to score a film. So Menken fell back on a classic musical technique that had been used in films before, but he milked it for all it was worth. A leitmotif, or idée fixe if you're French and hate Wagner, is a small musical theme, usually only a couple of notes long, that is representative of a character or theme. In The Little Mermaid, there are a few themes that get thrown around, but the biggest one comes from Part of Your World. This is the rising melody when Ariel first sings her lines.
Look at this stuff, isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete?
This melody is everywhere in this film, which is important because the song and its reprise are more than just really good songs. They're also the basic crux that the rest of the story hinges on. As I mentioned before, this is where Ariel sings her motivation. Here, Menken and Ashman use their Broadway backgrounds and introduce the concept of the I Want song. Put simply, this is a song that happens early in the narrative and clearly outlines what the character's goals are, often just out and out saying what they want.
I want to be where the people are.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry.
This rising melody, or leitmotif, is all over the place as it represents Ariel's goal as a character. It gets shifted and changed depending on the scene and the context of her goals, like in the reprise where the goal has shifted, but it's super triumphant and the waves crash. And this is the melody we hear when Ariel sings to Ursula when she makes the deal, as it's a representation of her goal to be with Eric. And when she loses her voice, we don't hear this leitmotif in the score almost at all. Just like she's lost the ability to sing it, we lose the ability to hear her motivations. It's probably a bit too on the nose, and Menken has never been this egregious with a theme since, but it works incredibly well in The Little Mermaid. For a first time scoring a movie, I don't think I could do better. Probably not even remotely close. Because the score, story, and animation are all connected to Part of Your World, which in my books is the quintessential I Want song, the movie works as a cohesive piece of art that is all connected, and the result is that the song and the movie are instantly recognizable. Both audiences and critics responded positively, and it marked a huge change in the way animated movies would be made and thought of in the movie industry. Ariel as a character is not the most feminist, but she's at least more complex than people give her credit for, and exceedingly more than her predecessors. The animation signified both the end and the beginning of new movie-making techniques. The music marked a huge change in the approach to the interconnectivity between story and song in animated movies, and also gave Menken the chance to cut his teeth before he went on to become one of the greatest composers of our time on film and stage. The Little Mermaid That Could is kind of a great way to describe this movie. Although it often gets recognition, I do think sometimes people really underestimate just how important this musical animated feature really was and still is. And that is why I think The Little Mermaid's legacy is so important for movies as art, and the reason animated movies are taken seriously, and why we now have even more dope-ass Disney princesses. Here are some stray thoughts. I think it's interesting that Under the Sea won the Oscar rather than Part of Your World because of how important that song is thematically, but Under the Sea really is a banger. I have so much respect for the animators. Can we just talk about the way Ariel's hair floats underwater and that this was all hand-drawn? I know that Disney has been working on a remake of this, and as much as I think this is a terrible idea, they have Daveed Diggs playing Sebastian the Crab, and I just can't be mad at that. But I really like these characters, and I don't want them to get abused by overuse or bad writing. Like in the prequel. Boom! You thought I forgot about that one too. But I didn't forget. I'll never forget. Hey, thanks for joining me while I get to talk about more Disney princesses, which is always fun. Remember to hit that like button like you're collecting your favorite thingamabob. Don't forget to leave a comment about your favorite Alan Menken piece of music or Disney princess, and subscribe so you'll never miss another awesome episode of This Is a Thing, or the long and the short of it, or a weekly podcast right here on Cinemaster's Ultimate Timeline.